for filmmakers, it's often the first kind of step they take towards filmmaking.
Yeah.
What would you say is the benefit of a short film? And why is it maybe helpful to do a few of them before, stepping into features or anything bigger?
Yeah, so the majority of people, everyone will have a different reason for making a short film. But the majority of those people are experimenting or proving that they can sustain a narrative and a short project from, beginning through production to completion. So we get a lot of people that are, it's their first time filmmakers, or it might be their second short, or they might have been working documentary and now they're working in narrative. So the main kind of focus of the competitive circuit at large is that you've created a piece of content and you want to prove that it works, that it actually has an audience. And the reason we have so many different film festivals is because there are different audiences. So if you're an animator, you're going to have a different audience than perhaps a documentary about human rights. So there's a reason why there are so many festivals. The reason why people there are filmmakers that go straight to making a feature. I wouldn't necessarily advise it because it's a bigger chunk of money and a lot bigger project. So it's not something that you can shoot on the fly. It's not something that you can grab your creative mates for a weekend and go and shoot somewhere very quickly. It's a little bit more foresight and planning, and you generally need a larger narrative as well. So short films are a really good way for someone to kind of basically prove that they can be creative in a short form, and tell a story succinctly, because everything has to be there for a reason. It's like when you watch TV, when something's good and when something's bad, when you're left with more questions or you've already predicted the plot. So I think short form is always a really good way for someone to experiment, but also just prove that they can do it.
Yeah, I think you said before that a short film can be a bit of a business card. I think that was maybe a word.
Yeah.
I think that's a great way of looking at it because, even if you wanted to go straight to making a feature, chances are people are not going to take the chance to give you a whole lot of money unless they know that you have the talent or, stamina or
Yeah.
whatever it is to make it happen. Because
Yeah.
there's probably a lot of people that say, making making feature films must be so fun, but might not understand how much work it is. And I think that's something a short film can also teach you. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. I mean, as soon as you move up from shorts to features, you suddenly acquire a much bigger crew. You might have, a first department, second department. You might, I think people do always presume it will be fun, but it's a longer slog. And you've got the pre-production in terms of, if you are doing crowdfunding or private investment, like trying to secure all of that before actually making the film, and then you've got the post, and then it's the what do you do after post? Well, it's pre-sales or distribution runs, or it's festival circuit. And I think with short film, you have the ability to be more nimble. So it still costs money. It doesn't have to spend a lot of, you don't have to spend a lot of money. It's dependent on the story you're telling and the production values that you're tying with that story. But we've got clients who have made films for like 50 quid, and they're not the kind of films that are gonna wow everyone with their story, but they're fun and they're quirky, and that's what audiences are sometimes looking for at a festival, so they do well. But then we've had stuff that have, their budget has been extortionate, like it's been ridiculously big, but it's because it's got a lot of CGI or a lot of VFX, or it's a genre piece, so there's a lot more kind of tied into that. I think it's always really good to see short films as a business card, because essentially every filmmaker should be aspiring to create a story that can be universally shown. That's why wherever a filmmaker is located, they're always looking at home turf, because they know how to measure success with that. They know the level and the hierarchy of festivals, but they're always looking overseas as well, because filmmakers will have a certain amount of knowledge of, you know, festivals in the US or festivals in Ireland. So I always kind of say to people that, you know, it's part of a strategy is seeing how universal that story is, because, you know, you want to be able to say, hey, this film that I made, this short film, not only kind of reaches people here that I know that are from my home country, but can translate in Australia or in Germany or in Canada. And, you know, that as a filmmaker is gold dust, because you're like, I've proved that I can tell a story and people want to listen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because you also said, you know, you have budgets for 50 quid and then, you know, much more than that. What would you say can be considered, you know, a good festival film versus maybe something that isn't as successful at short film festivals?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to come down to the film and other metadata, like such as running time or country production or general kind of narrative on screen. We find that the films that are a little bit more less heavy going tend to do well. But that's not to say don't go out and make a, you know, a light comedy, because it will get everywhere, because it's still down to the strength of the narrative you're talking about and also what a festival wants. But we find that a lot of programmers really struggle when they have films that maybe deal with a little bit darker or more heavier going narrative, and they wander towards 20 minutes, because it's not like, that's the hardest thing for a programmer, is trying to put together and curate a block of films that complement each other, or, you know, have similar themes, but to show as many as they can. And when everything's running like 20 minutes plus, they can't show as many as they'd like to in a 90-minute block or a 60-minute block. So we always say there's no magic running time. It's not a case of, you know, if your film's 7.5 minutes, it's going to get more than if it's 22. You'll be eligible for more festivals, because some festivals have a cut-off time of like 15 minutes and under, or 20 minutes and under, and so on. But it does come down to the story, because the best kind of short film is, well, let me rephrase that. The best longer running short is when you watch it and it doesn't feel like a long short, is that you are taken on a journey, or you are held by the hand by a really interesting character, and you get to the end of it, and when you look at the running time you realize, oh well, that was 22 minutes. It didn't feel like 22 minutes. That's the best kind of long short film. What we often find is a lot of longer shorts shouldn't be as long as they are. You know, there's lots of re-establishing shots, there's, you know, leading credits that you don't need, there's really long credits at the end, or, you know, there's just lots of fat to be trimmed. So the difference between a good film for a festival circuit and one that is less so is really kind of, it comes down to the story you're telling, but also where you're submitting it. Because, you know, if you look at what we call the top tier festivals, so Venice, Locarno, Berlin Cannes, and so on, and Karlovy Vary, you know, they are looking for a high concept drama, or, you know, they're looking for really kind of high, like more dramatic rather than genre or comedy. You know, they're not festivals that are kind of renowned for that. They're looking for those stories that a little bit more highbrow. So if you've made like a 22-minute opus about, you know, something that's really quite bleak, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to fit there perfectly, because, you know, it's still got to be the story that you're telling, and how it fits with their audience, and also what, you know, if they have a remit. If I look at some of the most successful films we've had over 16 years, I would say that some of the best traction we've had has been with the mid short, like 15 to 18. But then they've had their own kind of nuances, like, you know, documentary or female filmmaker or BIPOC narrative, you know. But then at the same time, if you have something that is short and pithy and fun and easy to program, you can get a lot of easy traction there. But it's still like, you should make the film you want to make, rather than like going out and going, I've been told that, you know, a 5-minute animated, you know, fun film will do me really, really well on the circuit. Because if that's not what you want to make, you're not going to enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think that also then comes back to do the film you want to make, but then once you've made it, strategy is important. Don't,
Yeah.
you know, waste your money, you know, going after festivals that won't program you. And I think that's where you and Festival Formula come in, for people that don't necessarily understand programming, for you to look at all the festivals and their film for them and submit the film where you think, you know, they can work. So can you talk a little bit about that strategy? Like, when you first get a film, first of all, what makes you accept them into your slate, but then also what is your strategy based on?
So we watch everything for free, and when we're watching a film, we're watching it and it sounds very kind of clinical when we say it like this, but we're looking at what stands out to us, like, you know, strength of narrative execution. Is it first time filmmaker? Is it a student production? Is it a female director or Black or Asian narrative? You know, all of those kind of cogs in the machine that makes the film, that film makes it very different from each other. If we watch a film and we can see an audience for it, so we can kind of go, yes, this would do really, really well on, you know, comedy categories, or this would do really, really well on like short documentary, you know, focuses. That's kind of what makes our brain tick, and we kind of go, we, you know, we want to work with this film, because we're very fussy about what we take on, because the circuit's really tough. And the circuit is so overcrowded, it's only ever going to get more crowded because we have more filmmakers and more festivals, which means more submissions going through the door. So we are only ever kind of taking stuff on that we go, you know what, I can see a circuit journey for this, and I can see traction that we can get, and I can see the festivals or types of festivals or level of festivals that this can play at. And then we would say to the filmmaker, like, well, look, this is the kind of, these are the strengths that your film has, and then we might kind of point out the weaknesses. And the reason we say strengths and weaknesses is that you have to apply that to the festivals when you're looking at where to submit. So as I mentioned earlier, those kind of top tier level films, a weakness for a film might be it's just not the kind of narrative that they're looking after, or they're looking for, sorry. So that's a weakness, but it's not a weakness of the film, it's a weakness of where it can go. And we would then kind of say, look, we think that it could go to here, this is a kind of like niches to pull out, and then we would have a chat with them about, you know, the budget that we would recommend. When we take on a film, we are generally then kind of looking to the assets that we can exploit. So, you know, like I say, it can be down to runtime. You know, if it's under 6 minutes, that's a super short for some festivals, so it's a less populated category. Nationality of director, that can be a bonus as well, or country of production. If it's a co-production, you've kind of got, like, you know, multiple areas that you can play into. Is it subtitles, because it can travel a little bit further in the European circuit. Stories in front of the camera, stories behind the camera, you know, that's how we focus in on where we think the film can get traction. Because I think an easy thing for all filmmakers to do is go by the prestige that they know. So it doesn't matter what film they make, they'll always want to submit to Sundance and Tribeca and South by and, you know, BFI London, all fantastic festivals, but they all have particular remits, whether that be like premiere status or production year, or they have particular tastes, or they have fewer programming slots. So they are kind of very oversubscribed festivals. So for us, what we're trying to re-educate a filmmaker about is saying, look, here is your film. Let's focus in your film that it is right now, and then look at where we can kind of submit to. Because if you just kind of submit to the same festivals over and over again with every single film, you're not really exploiting the strengths of each film individually. Because, you know, our goal for every client is to aim as high as we think the film can go within reason, but then kind of incorporate, well, is this a genre film? So we're going to look to the genre circuit. Is it a female narrative? We're going to look to that. Is it a student production, or is it a co-production from Mexico? So we're looking at South America. So you then start to filter out to less subscribed festivals or categories that you can really stand out in the crowd, because and you won't be able to do this completely for every single festival, but you want to be able to submit to a category where you stand out. Bear with me, just let my dog out. That's the whole purpose, is to find those pockets on the circuit, those festivals that have those niches or categories where you're so perfect that it'll be really hard for the programmer to say no. Because you don't want to always be consistently putting your film into a category which is live action short or short film, because everyone is. You kind of want to find those assets that can really, make your film sing. And like I say, you're not going to find them at every festival, but when you see them and you kind of go, they can be as specific as, short films about female narratives, but directed by male. If you've got that, perfect, because you don't want to shy away from the opportunities like that. So it's really trying to retrain filmmakers to think about their film as their film, not as a filmmaker that's made the film, because that inevitably makes a filmmaker turn their head to the prestigious festivals. It makes them go, oh, I'm not a filmmaker unless I've submitted to Sundance, even though every filmmaker will go, yeah, my film's not that kind of film, but I might as well, because then at least I've tried. And you kind of go, but you should kind of get out of that way of thinking, because the more you play into that, the more that you're basically wasting money. And it might not be much, but it could be one or two other festivals. But at the same time, it's the same filmmakers are always so surprised and gutted when they get rejected. And you're like, but if you knew that you were submitting there knowing that you're just doing it for the motions, you shouldn't be surprised by that. What you should do is kind of stop and go, probably shouldn't have submitted there at all. But I think the problem is, and I think I might have mentioned this last time, when you're a filmmaker and you're trying to get that kind of industry kudos, and that might be representation with an agent, or it might be that you're trying to get some kind of funding from an opportunity or a scheme, a lot of the people that are in charge of divvying up that pot of money generally can only talk in those big festivals. They don't see anything outside of them. So what happens is it just self-perpetuates, and a filmmaker will be like, oh, there's loads of festivals out there, but if unless it's one of the ones that this person knows, like I've got to go for those big festivals, which kind of whole other topic, but that also perpetuates this idea that you've got to know someone at a festival to get screened. Nobody watches your film, it's all a scam, it's all closed shop, which it's not. It's it's a massive circuit out there. It's only ever getting bigger, which I think comes with its bonuses but also downfalls, but they are kind of all kind of locked into each other.
But I think a lot of filmmakers will look at those prestige film festivals thinking this is the only audience that maybe matters. If you're at a smaller festivals where it's like normal people, not necessarily the giants of the industry. I think a lot of filmmakers probably go into it being like, well, what's the point though? Like, I need those important people to see my film, because otherwise how would I get my feature made? So I think that's a trap maybe filmmakers fall into.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to kind of decipher those two level of festivals is when we say an industry festival, we basically mean the people in the audience are industry people. They are not audience. They are sales agents, distributors, other programmers. They are people from within the film world. If you look at everything else, it's a mixture. So it can be a festival that has industry kudos. So it might have BAFTA, Academy, or BIFA, or Médaille d'Argent, or Goya affiliation. But the audience that are there are a pure audience. They're proper punters, which is kind of what you want, because you want to prove your film works. But then also you can still use the attraction of the festival selection to have those career conversations. because it's interesting, bearing in mind that we've just gone through, you know, a whole pretty much coming up to a year of festivals and a pandemic, and there was always this kind of fear from filmmakers going, well, if I can't attend my festivals, what's the point? And we were like, well, the thing is, you've got to remember, you can never really physically attend every selection you have because they're all over the world. Even if you had all the money, you won't have all the time. You have childcare, you have the day job, you have other engagements to kind of deal with. But that festival selection still went ahead. Your film's still screened, and it's still a laurel that you can discuss in your next conversation, whether it be with executive producer or a funding application, or, you know, trying to get somebody interested in your work as an agent representation. So I think it's trying to get people to realize that you are still a filmmaker because you've made a film. You're not a filmmaker because somebody's gone, yeah, we'll screen it at Venice. You know, that's a very good festival. It's the original first festival, but you know, particular type of audience, they only take on like 10 or 12 short films a year. And we've had a client screen there, and we've attended. It's a very, very kind of industry prolific festival, but it's very, very industry. So you're not going to get someone that kind of goes, oh, I really enjoyed your film as an audience member. You're going to get somebody go, let's have a coffee about, you know, your next project or anything like that. You can still get that at other festivals. I think people forget that it's quality over quantity. You want those festival selections to matter. You don't want them to be just something you collect and just smother a poster in, because you want somebody to look at them and go, I've heard of that festival, heard it's really good. Or that festival's really tough to get into. Or, you know, oh, great, like everything that festival picks is always really, really good, strong content, you know, and it's how other programmers see it as well. So I think trying to get filmmakers to realize that it's never a quick job. It's never like you make a short film, you screen it at a festival, someone sees it, and then just gives you like a massive budget to make a feature film. Like if it were that easy, we'd have a whole different industry. We wouldn't have the Emoji Movie. So you know, I think it's a slow burn. Like you never go into film for a quick and easy fix. Like how many people, like collectively between us, do we know that work in an area of our industry that are not doing the one thing that they actually want to do? It's because you're kind of in the industry in one guise, working on another. I didn't start out my journey going, I really want to do festival strategy. You know, I'm glad I do. It's kept me very busy for 16 years. But, you know, my background's as a writer. So, you know, that was my kind of step in. So that's why I can talk to people about their projects. I can talk to them about their scripts and their stories and, you know, their choice of editing. But, you know, I think every client that we have is either working in the industry as something else, whether it be a gaffer or a second AD or, you know, editor. And this is something that they're doing on the side to test it out. And sometimes it can mean that people take that leap of faith and go, you know what, this is what I want to do. But it's never an overnight sensation.
Yeah. No, it is a strange industry, I think, you know, the way people fall into it and then maybe also fall out of it again. And it's definitely strange. But yeah, because you also mentioned the the last year of COVID and everything being online. I mean, you know, I think I told you this before, with the film Leo DeHaan, the director of Persistence, which is with you at the moment as part of your slate. When we had our first screening a couple of weeks ago, it was quite strange to sit in my living room watching the screening all by myself and not necessarily, well, not at all having the experience of watching other people watch it or, you know, see how they react. So I think it would have been great to see an actual audience, whether it's industry or probably actually more interesting with, you know, normal people, to just see what they think. Like if they're, you know, it's quite a dark film, just kind of see the reaction. So I personally can't wait to go to festivals, whether they're big or small. I really hope they come back. But I think, we've briefly talked about this before, the Future Film Festival probably is a little different now with the online option maybe being added into the future. Also, like you said before, they're all over the world, so you as a filmmaker might not have the time or money to fly to everything and watch it in person. So yeah, if you can tell me what you think is the future of festivals.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're now getting to a point where festivals are going into their second virtual edition. So like last year they went virtual and made the pivot, and they're just coming to their second version of that now. And then you have festivals that maybe cancelled last year and have seen the wealth of opportunity that festivals pivoting have provided for audiences and filmmakers. So are now beginning to go, actually, whilst we pulled the plug last year because we weren't prepared, actually we've seen the potential, so now we're kind of going to go and do a virtual version this year. Going forward, the conversations that we've had with a lot of film festivals and in different territories as well is that they have actually kind of shown great interest in still going ahead as a hybrid, so a mixture of in-person and online, but the parameters of that isn't necessarily very clear right now, because obviously we are still in the middle of this. We're not in a position where, even though we've been given a date in June in the UK, that doesn't necessarily mean that like everything's going back to full capacity and everything else. So I think the idea has been kind of discussed by a few festivals that we've spoken to, where they have seen the massive increase in audience reach by having films online behind a paywall or geo-restricted, whatever, just to clarify, I don't mean online as in like just on YouTube or Vimeo, but there is some security parameters, and also to be able to engage and introduce the filmmakers behind those films to their audience online. So a lot of Q&As or panels or networking opportunities. So I do like, the conversations have been something along the lines of, we like the idea that we can still include as like more filmmakers by having access online. I don't think that means that festivals will wholly go online. I think what they might include is possibly a separate program which is available online, the rest available in person, but to be able to provide their audiences with opportunities to hear the creators behind the films. A lot of festivals in the past year that didn't offer industry previously because of lack of funding or venue availability or just contacts, the past year have actually introduced it. Because it's not that hard to kind of say to someone, hey, can you come and do a masterclass for 45 minutes, because they don't need to pay for travel, they don't need to pay for a hotel, they can literally just pay a speaker's fee or or have some kind of exchange, which benefited the audience and the delegates from that festival. So I do think that a lot of things will still exist online, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be like the future of film festivals is purely online. It's going to be some kind of aspect. And I mean that when we get back to a position of not having to have a limitation on how many people are in a venue, and that we can be in enclosed spaces and so on. So it's quite exciting. I know people fear change, especially with something that is so kind of cemented, in all the years of, it's a cycle. You make a film, you go on the circuit, you come off the circuit, you then do something with your film. So I think it's actually kind of, it's given festivals the opportunity to experiment and have given them the space to fail without everybody holding them accountable, because nobody had the right or wrong answers last year. It was everyone feeling around, kind of going, does this work for me? No, it doesn't. Does it work for them? Yes, it does. So kind of, I think it's definitely shaken off a lot of dust, and I do think that it will kind of shape the future of the landscape. And by that I mean there might be some festivals that maybe don't stick around because they weren't doing it for the right reasons to begin with, which isn't a bad thing. and some festivals that have maybe kind of upped their game because they've suddenly realized we had an audience that we didn't realize and we weren't catering for them. So now we have to. And that might be the hard of hearing or the disabled. You know, a lot of festivals were kind of coming back saying we didn't realize that a lot of our patrons wanted to attend but couldn't because our venues aren't kind of, you know, accessible for disabled people. Whereas with it being online, they suddenly could be engaged and be included. You'll find a lot of festivals now are asking for subtitles or captioning because they have an audience that they can tap into, which is hard of hearing. So, you know, I think it's made a lot of festivals sit up and do things better. Shame it took a pandemic, but you know, I think it's good. As much as all the bad stuff that's happened, there are a lot of silver linings.
Yeah, it's interesting because you just said there might be film festivals, you know, doing it for the wrong reasons. And also what you mentioned earlier, you know, kind of filmmakers or some filmmakers, you know, can be tempting to kind of collect those laurels, like plaster your poster, like I've won or been selected at everything. And I've had those conversations before with, you know, producers or people that have just been in the industry much longer. They will say, you know, there is festivals out there that mean nothing. You know, they're not, I guess, you know, are not doing it for the right reasons. They might give their mates the awards. But I think that comes back to programming, because if you don't know what those festivals are, you might be wasting your money going to those festivals. And I think, you know, that's probably also something that people should be warned about. Like, keep an eye on, you know, how festivals approach you. We've briefly talked about this last time, that whenever I post about a film I've been involved in, I get Instagram direct messages from film festivals saying, submit your film, which makes me instinctively go, no, because you don't know what the film is. You know, you don't have a reason for me to submit it other than you want my money, because you don't know the quality of my film. So yeah, if you can maybe give a couple of pointers to people to maybe, you know, what are red flags of festivals that might not have your best interest at heart.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is the main one. Like, you know, being contacted out of the blue, which isn't always a bad thing. I think, you know, the thing to kind of the thing to remember in our rule of thumb is if somebody is approaching you for your film and they're saying, hey, we'd love you to submit, unless they're asking for, like, unless they are giving you a waiver, so 100% discount, that message has been sent to many other filmmakers, and it is just a phishing email for you to kind of submit your film. So, you know, it's twofold for them. They get content sent to them and they get your submission fee. And I think that's the first thing. And always kind of asking back, saying, you know, the classic line is where they say, oh, we've seen your film at festival recently. And you go, so what festival? You know, it's that kind of, you're not being harsh, you're being investigative, because it's your work and your money, and you should always know where your money is being spent. And that is a whole other conversation, because a lot of filmmakers don't think they should pay submission fees, but I think a lot of filmmakers also don't realize that a lot of festivals survive on submission fees, depending on the level of festival and, you know, level of sponsorship and so on. The other thing I would say is the one that irks me the most is a festival that will kind of encourage you to submit to more than one category, because that's just a massive red flag for me. And they are generally festivals that have, you know, 20, 30. I counted one the other day, it had like 52 categories to submit to, and you just kind of go, like, it's insane. Like, it's, how are you curating that?
Yeah,
you know,
I can't even think of 52, like I couldn't actually think of 52 categories.
Yeah, but it was really, really kind of painful just to scroll, because you're like how it then just becomes an awards meal. Like, you know, especially when those categories are like, you know, submit here if you want to be in the running for best, you know, actress in a short film, or
Yeah.
best actress in a comedy, and you're like, it shouldn't, like, they're very didactic with their terms, And I just think that any festival that has that many categories should always be, seriously looked over. Cost is another one. Now this will be hard because for some people what is considered cheap will be somebody else's expensive. But for us, our rule of thumb as a company is if anything's over $40, to really kind of look and see, first of all, is the film suitable, because it might be it's a more higher profile festival, so comes with a larger submission fee anyway. And a lot of kind of, say, American Academy affiliated festivals may start at 40. That is their kind of regular deadline, or sorry, early bird deadline. To look at the cost, because sometimes the cost of these festivals are extortionate, and for some reason some of them, the lesser known ones, are ridiculously priced, whereas you might be able to turn to a festival that's been running like 20 years and it's less than half the same cost. As I say, you should always know where you're spending your money, and I think the one thing you can't rely on, unfortunately, in this day and age of deep fakes and fake news and everything else, is the reviews that are sometimes listed for festivals, because they are, well, it's twofold. I think some of them, it's very clear that they are either paid for, or they're just kind of duplicates. Like, it's very easy to kind of see common denominators. But also, I don't think a filmmaker across the board will feel comfortable with raising a complaint in a public space like that, because they will feel a little bit fearful that they'll get blacklisted or they'll get a bad name for themselves. So those reviews, like, we leave reviews for the festivals that we've had a really good experience with, but at the same time, like, we know that we're legitimate, we know that we're kind of leaving good responsive feedback. But when you get those festivals that maybe are in their first year and they suddenly have loads of reviews, and you go, well, how? Because they're in their first year. Like, it doesn't make sense. It's little things like that. And I always say, check their social media, like, check their website. Is it up to date? Are they posting regularly through the year? That's how we check if a festival is still running, because sometimes if you take some more, you know more specific festivals, like a lot of animation festivals are not listed on a submission platform. You have to go to their website to submit. So of course, you'll maybe look at the website and go, oh, it didn't run last year, why is that? And this will be pre-pandemic. And then it might be that you kind of go, okay, so they didn't get their funding that year, so they couldn't go ahead. Have they put anything up in the interim? So being a little bit investigative, and it takes time, and I realize that some filmmakers don't, they want to just click and go, which is kind of, submission platforms are that kind of easy now, that you can just go and click around and shop, and then that, hey presto, you've spent $300 very, very quickly. But just knowing where you're spending your money, and know that you're submitting to a festival that you feel comfortable and happy to screen at. And I think that's, for me, is the most important thing, because we get so many filmmakers that go, they aim too high, so they spend a lot of money, and then they go, I've run out of budget, so then they'll go really, really low, and they'll go for the free and cheap. And that's not to say that free and cheap festivals are bad. There are some amazing ones out there, but it shouldn't be geared around cost. It should be geared around quality of festival and where your film suits. So you should never submit to a festival that you don't feel comfortable if you were to be selected at. And it sounds silly to say that, but the amount of people that literally just go click crazy and then suddenly get selections and go, oh, I don't think this festival's very good, so maybe I'll turn it down. And you're like, well, you shouldn't have spent the money there if you don't feel comfortable in that. And if that just shows me that you haven't taken the time to research and look at the festival and see how it's run. And another one is people not realizing it's a monthly event, which personally, like, for us, it doesn't benefit the film or the filmmaker as part of a circuit journey run, maybe towards the end or maybe kind of after, fine. But when you're trying to kind of get that traction for other festivals, you want them to look at previous selections and go, that's a really good festival, or or that's a really niche festival, that's exactly what I'm looking for content wise. So those kind of monthly events, and you should just get into the habit of reading rules and regulations, which I realize is boring, But I can tell you now, there is one really, really fun festival in Texas that, as part of their rules and regulations, if you read to the very bottom, there is a discount code for you to use. Yeah. So it's, and it is quite fun, their rules and regulations, like what they've written. But stuff like that, and you can kind of, do yourself a favor and just by reading the rules and regulations, understand like how serious that festival takes it. What's their approach? Do they have something you need to look out for? Some festivals have sister festivals, and it will be written in their rules and regulations that if you submit to one, you'll be considered for both. And that might be something you're happy with, but it might be something that you're not. So, it's good to kind of know these things. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know that there was some sister festivals. Haven't heard of that before. That's interesting.
Yes.
With the short film, I'm in pre-production right now. Hund. I know you know a little bit about it. It's basically about a young boy with anxiety and his parents getting divorced and him like struggling through that, and his safety blanket is his dog. And I think it is a very special story because it's all told from the child's perspective, and considering child perspective and mental health, it's not something we've seen much before. And with this one, it's definitely also a film, we do want to approach festivals once we've shot it, and because it's something fairly unique but also has a message, it's always interesting, I think, to kind of think about the impact it might have. So, are you able to raise awareness with a short film, and how broad can that reach be? I mean, maybe also the fact that films might actually, or film festivals might actually also have online access now and have grown their audience, that might also feed into having an even bigger impact if you're selected by these festivals. So what's your take on making films that have maybe a bit of a message, or kind of trying to shine a light on something that's not represented much in the media, film, whatever it is? What's your take on that?
Absolutely. So that would take precedent when we are putting together a strategy, like absolutely. So for example, looking at Hund, it's a youth focused narrative, and there are youth focused festivals out there that want narratives that maybe are a little bit more mature, but from a child's perspective, because their audience is made up of children of that age. So they want to be able to start conversations or enlighten them to their feelings that maybe they're confused about. But then also mental health focused festivals exist because there is an audience for it, and they want, the easiest way to get people engaged or talking about something is to tell it to them in a story, because they don't feel they're being lectured to. They don't feel like they're having to watch a documentary about something. We've all watched kind of TV shows or films that touch on something, but we've been taken through that journey because it is a narrative fiction or it's based on truth. So you kind of have that slight separation of, I'm watching this for entertainment and education, really, but they're kind of entwined. When you look to festivals, you'll find pockets of festivals that want things like that, like mental health or youth narrative. But then what you'll also find is that festivals have, they are kind of sometimes a gateway to other opportunities for a film. So we've had it with several films actually, where it's very common in certain states of the US, and in certain parts of Europe, that a festival will kind of return to you after you've screened after you've had your film screened there, will say, look, we curate a collection of films to go into children's hospital wards, and your film we would love to include. Are you okay for us to do that? We've had that happen several times in France and in Germany, and it's beneficial for the filmmaker because they're like, well, yeah, because that's kind of, if you see that the audience is there and it's beneficial, that's just another string to my bow. And then, we also have a lot of education bodies and charities reach out and kind of say, look, you've got a film that deals with grief from a youth perspective. We'd love to include that in our training program. is that something that the filmmaker would be happy with? And of course the filmmaker's always elated, because it's not what they made it for, it's not the purpose, but it's repurposed to help somebody in that area, which I think some filmmakers don't always realize can happen. We've had several films like, and they're not always made with the message in, in full view. Like sometimes it is just a story about, somebody who is dealing with grief, and is somebody who doesn't necessarily engage well with others, and the story is about them realizing that the grief is what's stopping them from engaging with people. That kind of film, for example, ended up with a charity whose focus was about teaching children to be kind, and understanding that we're from different cultures, we look different, we sound different, but at the same time we're just all kind at heart. So it's interesting how some of these films we take it on a circuit journey, but then we can also kind of say to a filmmaker, oh, by the way, we've been approached for this, like, what do you reckon? And they're always so thrilled as a filmmaker, because it's not what they expected, but it just shows that there's a life for a film. A film shouldn't just be made for a festival circuit journey. It should be the film you want to make as a creative, that you take on a circuit journey if you do, but then also that you are happy to have included in a festival, in a hospital curated program for kids, or if you want it to be part of a charity organization, or anything like that. But also kind of go, I'm happy if I put it online because I made it and it's a story that's really important. So I think issue-led films can do really, really well. I mean, a good example is The Silent Child. It raised the attention to kind of young deaf people, but also giving them the access to understand what was happening to them, and also kind of raised awareness that there should be more support. That film possibly was made with that in mind, but the way that we're taught that story is through a story. It's not kind of like a finger wagging, I'm now going to tell you loads of facts that you should know. It's actually more like, here's a story, and hey presto, you've learned something that maybe you didn't before, and we've got people talking. So it can be really, really effective, but again, shouldn't necessarily be the core. Like, it shouldn't be like the main beat of your story,
Yeah.
because I think that's when it can suffer. It begins to be a little bit more like a lecture.
Yeah, I think with Hund, I think we're being very careful not to actually, message in your face.
Yeah.
There's not even judgment. There's nothing like that. It's really just showing a child going through something. And it's really just a glimpse of whether you've been through it yourself or you haven't. Understanding or getting, bringing that feeling of what he's going through closer to you, whoever you might be. I think that's really what we're trying to do with this one. But something you've also said last time was when we were talking about what you also look for in short films you take onto your slate, or what you don't accept, or what is a big no-no, is the lack of story. And that I think is really interesting. If you can briefly just talk about what you maybe mean by that, is because obviously a film is meant to be a story. So maybe what you've come across where you like there is no story. Can you give us not necessarily an example of a specific film, but what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing to remember is your film in its kind of, if you're stepping onto a festival circuit, you've got to realize that your short film is being viewed amongst other short films, or it's being paired with a feature because it's got similar themes and so on. So you kind of have to tell a story to an audience in a succinct amount of time, and take them on a journey, or tell them something new, or tell them a story they've heard before from a different perspective. And sometimes when you have a film that just doesn't seem to do anything, we're with a character but we don't learn anything, we don't progress, it's kind of, it feels stale, even though the production might be amazing. We've seen some brilliant kind of content that you go, this is shot beautifully, but a film isn't picked because it's shot beautifully. It's picked because it tells a story that a programmer is like, my audience need to hear this, or I think my audience will appreciate this. So we get a lot of stuff where they're kind of mood pieces. You know, we're kind of almost not immersed, but we're just dipped into a world. We don't really kind of progress, or we don't learn anything. And then we see a lot of films where nothing happens. And that's not to say that a film has to be rammed with, you know, action. You know, you can have very quiet still films where it still speaks volumes about a particular narrative or story. But I think films that suddenly end and we're left with more questions than answers, you know, if we're struggling, you know, we kind of have to raise that as an obstacle and kind of say, look, well, if we're pointing it out, we're not a programmer. We're almost like pre-selectors, because we're kind of curating, you know, what we want to represent and then sending it on to festivals. So we've kind of done a bit of the work for the festivals. But you know, if we're asking those questions, then a festival programmer is really going to struggle, because we only ever want to send them something where they go, oh, that was great, or that was fun, or that was so touching, or, you know, that was really interesting, I didn't know anything about that. You know, I suppose a good way of distilling it, not to focus on one format, but, you know, documentary shorts, programmers are always wanting, they're always running short of it. So the easiest thing to say is, when you and the documentaries sell out really, really well, shorts package wise at a circuit, because you can go into a screening and watch 6 different short documentaries and come out learning 6 different new things. So, you know, that's another way of putting it. I know it's documentary specific, but if you apply that to narrative fiction, where you kind of go, I want somebody to come out and remember all of those 6 different stories, rather than kind of going, I can only remember 3 of them because the other 3, they didn't really stick in my mind. Why didn't they stick in my mind? Well, it might be because it didn't say something that was strong enough for me to latch onto. And that's at the audience stage. So, you know, a programmer is only ever wanting to kind of put stuff in front of their audience where they know that they're gonna respond, that they're gonna kind of come out and go, that film's amazing. You know, I think the one thing, if I could urge any person that wants to make short films to do, is to watch other short films, and you will not like everything. We go to a festival and come out and just go, half that program is just really not great, but it suits the audience. So, you know, and we are not the audience, we're looking at it through like, what would we take on our slate, and, you know, so on. So I think watching short film and understanding why you like something and why you don't like something, and it could be that you just don't like the script but the story is still interesting, or you don't like how long it took someone to execute a narrative but you really like the narrative. You know, understanding what makes you tick as an audience member will really infiltrate how you create content as a filmmaker, because you can stop being a filmmaker but you can't stop being an audience member. So you kind of have to entwine the two and kind of have them feed into each other.
That's a good point. Yeah. Great. I think that was actually a really good note to end it on.
Good.